Lato Dives Romalen, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being today with us. We are continuing our campaign, Meet Our History, from Chanipen Research, Memory and Justice. And today we have the great pleasure to present another important book that marked the Romani scholarship of 21st century. It's a real great honor to welcome Professor Ian Hancock, who was and is one of the most influential Romani scholar and human rights advocate worldwide. His work has been central in bringing Romani history, identity, and the fight against anti-Roma racism into academic, political, and public spaces. We also know that he has served for the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council and receiving numerous international awards for his contributions to human rights and research, and he has published extensively, with his work being translated in multiple languages. Today, we are extremely privileged and especially happy to have him to discuss his book, We Are the Romani People. Please join me in giving him a very warm welcome. Welcome, Kako Yanko.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor, a pleasure to be with you.
Yes. So in the next couple of minutes, what we will be happy to discuss with you is it's foremost about your book, but we also have a couple of questions about memory, history, language, how all these elements are important for us, for the Romani people, as an international and global minority and community. And if you allow me, I will start with the first question. So, Kako, what motivated you to write this book, and who was your intended audience when you?
Well, um, it begins really a long time ago in 1972 when I was offered a job at the University of Texas.
Hmm.
So I came to Texas and I began as a young, new assistant professor, actually teaching English.
Hmm.
But once I was there, I asked the department if I could teach a course of Romani studies. Back then, I didn't say Romani studies, I said Gypsy studies,
Hmm.
which I would not say now. And they said, well, what would this do in an English department?
Hmm.
I said, well, I could talk about gypsies in literature.
Hmm.
So they said, fine, you can do it. So once I had the class, I started, and I did deal to an extent with the image of gypsies
Hmm.
in literature and in film and in music. But I started to introduce real history, and I would use the word gypsy against the word Romani to show that the gypsy image is created and the Romani actuality are the real people.
Hmm.
And the course attracted a lot of students, and eventually I was able to make a case for a proper course in Romani studies that was cross-listed in the linguistics department and the Asian studies department. And once I had that course, I could divide it into areas. One area would be, of course, the image in literature, but that would be the jump off point. And I would say, well, you all know what gypsies are, or you think you know. But do you know who the real Romani people are? And then I would get into the history and so on and so on. And as the years went by, I developed this course and decided to take my course notes and put them all together into the book.
Mm.
I had already written a book about that time, early time, called The Pariah Syndrome,
Mm.
which introduced, I think for the first time in English, information about the slave trade in Romania, in Wallachia, and a lot more about the genocide in Nazi Germany. And that book made an impact, especially about the robia, about the slavery,
Mm.
because most of what is about that, at least back then, was in Romanian or French, but not in English. So when I decided to put my class sections together into We're the Romani People, I thought, who should my audience be? And the questions that I would get from people came from novelists
Mm.
writing novels
Mm.
about gypsies, not about Romanis. They wanted romantic characters in novels. They wanted their Carmens and Esmeraldas. Um, so I wrote the book to educate novelists, but also journalists writing for newspapers
Mm.
and for researchers as well, and teachers especially. So each chapter in the book has a few little questions for the classroom, um, for the students to talk about in a Romani studies class. So that's the history of the book, and it's gone into several languages, and now it's going into Spanish, which I'm very pleased about.
Yeah, we are extremely pleased that it will be translated in Spanish. It's a very awaited piece to be translated, and I hope it will be continue to be translated. And thank you so much for explaining me this little history behind the book and the intended audience. I was also wondering about the title because it is a powerful statement, right? We are the Romani people. What does this affirmation mean in a historical context? That the Romani people history was marked by denial and invisibilization.
This is something that I talk about a lot. We are a global people. We're not just a European people. And we're not only a European people. So much of our core identity is Asian, not European. But we are a blend of both. And one of the problems we have, not internationally, but even nationally, and I'm sure in Spain, although there is a very large Romani population divided into different groups,
Mm.
the groups argue with each other. And it's difficult sometimes for one group to agree with another group. And that's nationally. Internationally, that situation is even greater. And so I try to stress the point that we are one people historically, but today we seem to be many different peoples, because when we lose our language, we start to lose our culture. That is a natural thing. It just happens. Once you start to lose your language and your culture, it gets replaced by the language and the culture of the country you are in. So in order to, so the point there is that the difference from, let's say, Calais in Spain and Vlach in Romania is not because of what we created. Because at one point in history, we didn't have those differences.
Mm.
Once coming into the West, moving off in different directions, being separated by great distances and great lengths of time, we start to lose our Romani pen, our Romaniness, and replace it with, we would say, Chanipen,
Mm.
non-Romaniness. And then that's what makes one group different from another group, even though we're Romani. So what I try to stress is the oneness of us by trying to recover lost culture and lost language.
Mm.
It's easier to recover the language because we can have classes, and that is happening. It's happening in Spain. I can talk a bit more about the language maybe in
Mm.
a short while, but it's more difficult to bring back cultural behavior that perhaps you never had,
Mm.
because then you would appear to be acting on a stage.
Mm.
Um, so the problems we face as a people are, first of all, to understand our history, and that is from education, from knowledge. Chanipen means knowledge. It's important for us, but it's also important for non-Romani people. Gaji, Bios, it's important that they know who we really are. They also need to know that the differences that exist from one Romani population to from another Romani population, we didn't make that.
Mm.
Really, they made that. They made us slaves. We didn't make ourselves slaves in Romania. They did that to us. We didn't walk into the gas ovens in Nazi Germany. They did that to us. We wanted to go into churches. They stopped us going into churches. So they have to understand
Mm.
why we are what we are now. And we have to understand our own history, because when they ask us, who are you? Where do you come from? And we don't know enough to tell them, they're going to tell us. And they're going to say whatever they want to say. Oh, you people, you come from Egypt. That's why you're called Gitanos. We don't come from Egypt. but we're stuck with their name for us. So
Mm.
that's got to change.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting how you are putting, Kako, the way that our history has been also erased, the way persecution had happened to us, and the way that it's still denied and invisibilized. Because you do speak this in your book, and I think it's excellent how you are critically putting and even questioning the numbers of the murders, for instance, of the Romani people in the
Yeah,
Second World
Holocaust.
War. And I think we need more critical approaches into that. And I really like the way that you say we are many people from different parts, which means that we also have a huge diversity, and there is not a homogenization between us. Although it's important to sometimes revitalize, right? Uh, our Romanesque, and that could probably be done when we have our history acknowledged, repaired, when we receive the regrets, when we learn about ourselves, as you said, when we have the Chanipen, when we have the knowledge about ourselves. So thank you so much. I would like to go maybe a little bit later about the memory and history and language. Perhaps can we stay a little bit more on the book, because I'm really, really curious to find out a little bit more details about it. And you did speak at the beginning that the book wanted to combat what the gypsy is, which is a created term, and that springs from the hatred and inferiorization that we have been put on. And you wanted to know that the people know who are the Romani people. And I was wondering, what are other main misconceptions about the Romani people that your book wanted to challenge?
Well, the misconceptions, I think, come from a transference, a psychological transference from the non Romani world
Hmm.
of their what they would like us to be, at least historically. Because historically, for the first centuries after we came into Europe, we had a place at least, although we were kept on the move.
Mm,
Uh, we couldn't stop in many places, um, which which had a direct impact on our means of livelihood. If we were not, those of us who were held in Wallachia and Moldavia
mm,
um, were there. I mean, there were people who escaped, um, Nitotsi, who were our
mm,
heroes. Um, but those who moved out into the rest of Europe um, really had to keep moving because, for a number of reasons, I've come up with maybe 9 different reasons for Romaphobia, anti-Ziganismus, there's different words. Um, One of them was being seen as not Christian.
mm,
That was a biggie, really. Not white. That was another one. Um, Supposedly magical. So you have to you have to put yourself in the social context of the time.
mm,
If you are continually being made to move by the whatever were the police or the soldiers back then, um, you were not given time to collect everything
mm,
for your work, like your anvil and your tools. You had to get up and go and leave everything behind. So, means of making a living had to adapt to being moved at any moment. Well, fortune telling is something you don't need equipment for. You just
Hmm.
need a hand. So you could take that with you. And the medieval population, the early European population, very suspicious. This was a good way to make a living. But it also gave you the reputation of being mystical and magical and curses and all of that. Um, it also, and this is something we know now, when non-Romani people come for a reading, they bring their problems.
Hmm.
They bring their unhappy non-Romani life into the Romani world, which gives us a perspective on what it's like if you're not Romani, despite all of the problems that Roma have to deal with. So other kinds of work that you could take with you became part of the image.
Hmm.
So I was talking about projecting an image that was not one of necessity because of being moved, but one because gypsies have this something in them that
Hmm.
keeps them romantically moving from place to place. And the settled population admired that in some peculiar way. They thought how nice it would be not to worry about anything, just to move from place to place and then sing and dance outside around a fire. How romantic. And that became a very fixed image.
Hmm.
Also, and that was an attractive image,
Hmm.
including the spells and the love spells and the magic. The culture is a very closed culture. So any, let's say, young non-Romani men trying to get romantic with Romani girls don't get very far. They are kept back because because our culture puts a division between Romani and non-Romani. So the family structure is not going to allow that. So the fact that female Romanis are untouchable
Hmm.
makes them all the more uh, enticing.
Hmm.
Um, I remember as a kid, not being allowed to smoke. I wanted to smoke because I couldn't smoke. Of course, I still did. Um, so you've got that um, unattainable image, you've got the magic image, you've got the wandering image and dancing and so on. And it has become who we are.
Hmm.
Um, Part of the Romani archive collection is framed covers of musical scores, mostly from the early 20th century, before radio and television, when people would be at home playing their pianos and singing, and they would have these musical scores with illustrations on the front. And so many of those songs, not our music, but um, entertainment in the Gajakania, um, with names like I love you, gypsy girl,
Mm.
gypsy, I love you. So it's not a female person with an actual name. It's not Mary, I love you, Anna, I love you. It's just gypsy.
Mm.
So you're not a person, you're an image. All of that has hurt us because it's nothing new. It's centuries old. Um, so what we have to do is educate ourselves. And I keep coming back to this. We have to educate ourselves so that we can answer questions properly. And the non-Romani people have to be educated about us. The I have one of what I've done in looking at our language is trying to figure out which one of the many dialects is the best one for people to learn. Um, in the different places where it is spoken, different words have been kept and different words have been lost. And the ones that have been lost
Mm.
have been replaced with European words. So especially the language, the dialect with the most speakers is Vlach, which is from Romania, but at the same time, the vocabulary of Vlach Romani is chock-a-block full of Romanian words, not Romani words.
Yeah.
Um, so if I'm speaking Vlach to, say, somebody from, let's say, the Netherlands, he's not going to understand the Romanian word. He'll understand the Romani words, but not the Romanian words. So we have to look around all of the dialects and find all of the words that were there in the original language. And one of the words, which is used in a lot of dialects, but not Vlach, as far as I know, is Endani. Endani is especially in the Bulgarian dialects. And it's a word I'm using to replace the romantic word that people use, which is tribe. I
Mm.
don't like to talk about the different gypsy tribes, which is sort of
Mm.
romantic. Um, the problem is when we speak English, we we say gypsy all the time, and we say tribe all the time. At least I hear this. I
Mm.
try to avoid it, but people around me still use these words, which are not our own words. So I use Endani, I plural Endaya, it could be
Mm.
Endaya, to mean the different categories. So the Vlach Endani, the Calais Endani, and so on and so on and so on. The Sinti Endani. And yes, we are split into different groups, different Endaya, but we share so much if we look for it. Here, where I live, we have maybe three Endaya,
Mm.
um, pretty much evenly split. Um, the biggest is Vlach, mostly Kalderash, some Machwaya. Now we are having some Lowara, who are more recent arrivals, and they are deeply into their Pentecostalism in Romani churches here. The other large population are mostly Romani Cel from the British Isles originally, and also some, um, they call themselves Black Dutch, but they came historically into Pennsylvania a different way, but they've pretty much been incorporated into the Romani Chel population. These groups stay completely separate from each other. But over the years, they have had to join forces for work. The main occupation of Ramechals here is surfacing the roads, black topping. Sometimes these jobs are very big, like a whole parking lot of a supermarket or something. And there are not enough people to do the whole job. And so they ask people in the Kalarash community to come and join in and share the cost, the earning, which gives them an opportunity to sit down and talk to each other and have lunch together. There are different behaviors over food, but there's time to talk. And it was interesting to listen to Rami Charles and Blach Kaldas saying, well, what do you call this? What do you call your hair? And it's the same word. What do you call your nose? Same word. What about your ear? What about your tongue? How do you count up? What do you call people who are not Romani? What do you call Americans? Well, we call them gorgeous. We call them gaje. Same word. Um, and the more that the different groups learn about each other and stop thinking that each one is the best, and that's a real problem. The way we speak is the best. Why should we have to learn to speak like them? We got to get past that.
Yeah.
But the more we understand what we have in common, the more we will see ourselves as having a shared history. Because as a combined people, we would have a huge voice. When I reminded the Norwegians when we were there are more Roma in Europe than there are Norwegians. And
Absolutely.
we would be a powerful voice if we could get our own act together and cooperate with each other. And this is another whole area of discussion.
Yeah, definitely. Kako, I see how you beautifully engage with these things of, okay, there are some differences, there is diversity, but we have so much in common. And I do see that you put the Romani language as a core element in uniting us. And you have been a key figure, not just in Europe, but also globally in studying the Romani language. And I was wondering if you can reflect a little bit why it's so important and so central to our Romani identity, and how we can develop more strategies to preserve and revitalize the Romani language.
Ooh. First of all, we have to choose a dialect to learn. If you don't speak it at all, you're going to put a lot of effort into learning a new language because it will be a new language. Historically, in Spain and in Hungary, it was illegal to speak it, and that's why it's disappeared in Spain. Um, in England and Scotland, it was a little bit different, but the language disappeared there too. It lasted longer in Wales because of being isolated geographically and also being surrounded by Welsh and not by English. But even that has now gone. And what you have in England and in Spain is not Romani, grammatical full Romani, but you have English with Romani words in it. And in Spain and Portugal, you have Spanish and Portuguese with Romani words put in. But that doesn't allow you to understand spoken Romani. So if you're going to learn the proper language, which one? The one that has sort of become the most learnt, and I had to make an effort to learn it when I came to America, is Vlach, because it has the most number of any Indani, and it is the most widely spoken geographically, because after the desrobirea, the abolition of the slave trade in Romania, the freed Roma were they spread out everywhere, North and South America, down into China, everywhere. So you're going to hear Vlach Romani all over the world. But it, like I said, it is mixed with many words which are not Romani. So what people have tried to do, lots of people, both Roma and non-Roma, have tried to create an international sort of Romani dialect. And for some of those people, it's been a kind of a nationalist project. And for others, for non-Roma, it's been more of an academic exercise. And there are now textbooks and online dictionaries and so on. But there is still resistance to for for people in one Indani to learn the dialect of another Indani. So my advice would be, well, if you have your own that's still spoken, great, learn it even better. Make sure the kids know your Slovak variety of the language. Don't lose it. Try and learn something that people are learning in other countries as well. So you would have two kinds. It's not that difficult to do, actually. If you are in a country where it's gone, Spain, for example, you've got two choices. You can revive the old Calo variety of Romani, which has been done. We have a whole grammar and dictionary of what Romani was like before it was forbidden. So, from a national or a ethnocentric or Indanocentric point of view, you could say, I want to learn what our ancestors spoke here in Spain.
Mm.
But if I speak it, are they going to understand me in Russia or Argentina? So let me learn Kalo, Kalo Romani, not mixed Kalo, um, but also learn what is often referred to as common Romani.
Mm. Mm.
Because my own family is a mixed family. My mother's side is Ramichau,
Mm.
and I was born in England, so I heard that an awful lot. My dad's family came there from Hungary, but they were the Bashalde Romungre people, musician
Mm.
people, who a lot of those also have lost the language. My family didn't. So I would hear it from my grandparents' side. So as a kid, I would hear it, but it was not the common language in the home because my mom's side didn't understand. So when I came to live in America, I already knew the Ramichau way of talking, which is called Pagadi, which means broken. um, but I was hearing Kalderash all
Mm.
around, and some Machwaya dialect, Machwana dialect as well. And I picked up on it as well as I could. Um, and that's what I recommend people should do. I remember bits and pieces from my grandparents who they would say things very differently. Uh,
Mm.
uh, can you speak Romani yourself?
I am Rudar, I'm Beash, which is like I know a couple of words from my grandma, which is maybe 20, 30, but I
Yeah,
do trying to learn. And it's a specific, history of the Rudar community, right? In slavery, they were held at the boyar houses, at the prince houses, where they were heavily persecuted not to speak, right? And in Romania, they are like maybe a couple of hundreds of years already when the Rudar don't speak the Romanes. And it's very, very upsetting. But there are words there, Kako, like Devla, Benga, like Gageu, like all these words, they are there. And my parents are using it very often without even having the idea that okay there are some words reminding to us, but they use it very naturally. But yeah, it's very upsetting this case. And Romania is a whole story with the groups of Vendani and so on. But it was fantastic to hear you the way you speak. It was just like even melodious because it was so fluent. The Romanes that I have learned it and see it and hear it, it's very interrupted by Romanian words. It's not so fluid completely. Like I did heard another Romanes speaker who was only speaking Romanes, Michal Miljigar, who is our friend from Czech Republic, who actually helped us to build and create our name Chanipen, because we started from Zanipen, but we are in Spain and we don't have that sound, right? So
yes.
how do we colorize the word? Well, with the linguist the support from Mijigar, our friend and professor in Romanes, he helped us to build this cha and nipen, and to build it. And I really like the way you put it, because we were like, let's go back to roots, and let's see how we can create new words the way you said, to bring it, to revitalize, to learn. So thank you for that example. It's just fantastic. And I would speak with you about the language so much. But Kako, I have 100 questions for you. Please.
Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. Before we
Yeah.
do, before we do, don't regret that you don't speak Romani. Go ahead and start
And
learning it.
yeah, yeah, that's it. We had at CU some courses, and me and my partner, we are learning. There are now some apps created by our friends Natalie Tomenko and some others, and there are some books and dictionary. But we are also the same because we are now creating a Romani agenda with Chanipen with our organization, and we will have a Romani section. And we were wondering what Romani to teach to the kids. Calo or standard Romanes, which is mainly Vlah or Căldurar, right? So it's like, it's a dilemma. But listening to you, I understand now that it's important to have it both. So
Both,
thank you.
yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. So now that we talk a little about language, the importance, the identity, I think we can move a little bit about the historical memory that Romani people have, not just in Europe but globally. And I will go back to your book because you do highlight so much how important is the history which has not been told from our perspective. And you do speak and challenge how the Gaji people have been talked on our behalf and have created all sorts of fantasies without actually listening to us, to the people. And I was wondering, in your perspective, and you are not just a scholar and an academic, you're also, and you have been considered, and I think in your core, you're still a political activist. This is how I still see you, right? I mean, you did participated in a lot of conventions in UN. You have been a voice also in our emancipation movement, I would say. So how and why it's so important to address the historical memory in fighting nowadays the anti-Roma racism.
Yekipe or Yekipen means unity, oneness, literally oneness. This is what we should be striving for because there is strength in unity.
Yeah.
But until our different political, social organizations can agree with each other and work together and become a much larger voice,
Mm,
we are not going to be listened to.
mm,
We will be pushed aside. Oh, they're only gypsies,
yeah.
only gypsies. Um, and this is still, to a large extent, how we are being treated in getting our own history from the Holocaust out to the world. Um, it's very difficult to have any power, zor,
Mm,
um, if you say something and then another group contradicts you.
yeah.
Uh, I keep on about this because it makes me so angry. It took us a very long time. We had to threaten lawsuits. We had to
Yeah.
march um, at the Capitol in Washington to get our first Romani representative on the Holocaust Memorial Council.
Mm,
When the announcement came that the first, and back then they said gypsy, they didn't say Romney, the first American gypsy, da, da, da. I got a phone call from a Romani leader in Boston, as it happens, um, said, why did he get on there? It should have been me. This was a man, he's no longer with us, and I don't speak badly of him, but he could not read and write very well. But instead of saying, congratulations, we should all be happy, how can we help this man represent us?
Mm.
He said, why him? Why not me? And we have to get beyond this kind of thinking. It's very old-fashioned cultural thinking. Um, we did have some political activity, which is in that book from before the war, even way back after the abolition. Um, then everything went to pot during the war. Every time I say the war, of course, I mean the Second World War. Um, but after that, when we get into the 60s and 70s, we start to get this effort to create the International Romani Union, um, which is outlined a bit in the book.
Mm.
Um, and the idea, that wasn't the original name for the organization. It became the overall name, but it was a union like an umbrella to coordinate lots of different national and international or just national Romani organizations under one huge umbrella. And it was working quite well. We managed to get recognition in the United Nations eventually.
Mm.
We lost it through squabbling and criticisms, unfortunately. Now we have it again in one form or another. Um, we managed to get the Indian government aware of us, and this was a huge thing. Um, and to have a country behind us, they partially financed the World Romani Congress in 1971 with the World Council of Churches. Um, and now there was a period of different regional organizations and different national organizations and different World Romani Congresses where different resolutions were passed. One was to stop using the word gypsy in any of our own documentation.
Mm.
Um, Different commissions were created, one for language, one for Holocaust reparation, and so on and so on, one for education. They didn't really go anywhere um, because of lack of cooperation. Um, but then after 1989, when Eastern Europe opened up and a lot of Romani people from Eastern Europe moved west, that really revitalized the language quite a bit. So we have uh, Romungre leaders in Hungary who had never spoken Romani who are learning Kalderash.
Mm.
It's not their ancestors' dialect, but it's Romani, and that's what matters. Um, and now there are plans afoot for the next World Romani Congress to be held in Bulgaria later on in this year. And I hope, I wish it every success. Let's see what happens. Um, so things are happening. We are also getting more educated young people. It was very encouraging for me to be in Budapest and Stockholm and Oslo and other places and meet educated, professional young Romani people who are proud of who they are. It was, it is clear that our generation of younger educated Roma know less about the history and the culture and the language because they got opportunities from their own social backgrounds that generally didn't encourage language and culture.
Mm.
And the lower down you go socially to where most Roma live, at the bottom level, you actually are ashamed of being Romani. You're ashamed of speaking the language. You don't want the kids to know it. And that is heartbreaking.
It's
Pretend
hard.
it's very, I was told as a kid, and people, they all have the same story. When I was a kid, you're very light faced, light skinned. Don't tell people. When I got the job at the university, and I just sent a message to the chairman who just retired, and I told him it was so difficult for me for all the years that I was a professor to listen to the foolish comments from my supposedly educated colleagues.
Yeah.
Ian's a gypsy. You know, it was embarrassing, it was hurtful. And so I can understand when my parents, especially my mother, would say, "Don't tell people you're a gypsy." She'd say gypsy. It won't help you. And when I started to teach, the senior professor that sort of took me under his wing told me the same thing. He said he was from Belgium, he wasn't an American, and he knew about the prejudice. And he
Mm.
said, "Don't talk about your background here, it won't help you." But once my name started to get out there and people started asking questions, and so we got to get rid of the shame. And it's a hard thing to tell somebody to go into a mahala and
Mm.
tell people who live in one room with no electricity, no running water, you really need to know more about our history and our language. And they're going to say, get lost. Where, where am I going to find food for the family tonight?
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
am I
I
going to be safe walking to the village? This is what concerns our people, not language and culture.
Of course, because we are a racialized and community who have lived in poverty for centuries, and it's not just the poverty, but also the stigma that is associated with us. Because any identity, as you know, like if lives in a hostile environment, stigmatized with a lot of hatred, they will not feel safe to say who they are because our existence have been criminalized for years and for centuries, and we have been even killed for that, exterminated. So it is a reality for many people that nowadays cannot be who they are because the environment that they live in. And I really like the way you put it that many Romani of our of many communities live on the button in surviving, in trying to make a living. So it's very difficult to go and say, okay, we need to study, we need to do that when we actually have to survive. And when we live in a society that don't even recognize our racism, our culture, doesn't respect uh, our humanity also. So thank you for that. I think it's very important, and I feel you so much with what such passion and love. You talk about the language and protection, but also you have this empathy in recognizing and seeing that the Romani community are still, living on terrible conditions. And I was wondering if we can connect this with the First World Romani Congress, actually, when you said, because you pinpointed to that there was this mobilization of different Roma people participating in this meeting where you have decided the anthem, the flag. Were you thinking that that meeting would mark so much the global community of the Romani people? Because now there is no any Roma who is not proud to, have the flag to say that we are Romani, we are not gypsies. So how do you remember that moment, and how do you feel about that?
To tell you the truth, I didn't think those things, because for me, it was an open door, because the world I lived in was just family.
Yeah.
And I was young, and I had started I was at the university, um, which was a huge opportunity for me. Um, but the only reason I was there is, and I told this story over and over and over and over again. There was a story in the paper about a Romani family that suffered as a result of discrimination, and it it resonated with me very deeply, because these people were not doing anything except trying to find a place to pull their wagon over, to stop their children there. And so I became angry and wanted to talk to somebody. And so I got one of the big fat London telephone directories back then, 4 different color fat books. And I looked up Gypsy, and there was a phone number for the National Gypsy Education Council, or Gypsy Cal, whatever it was called back then. And I called them, and I got through to somebody who said, "Come to one of our meetings." And I thought, wow, a whole gypsy organization. This is great. So I went to this, and I met 3 people. They weren't Roma, but they are the 3 turning point people, I think, in my career. And there was Grattan Pluxon, there
Yeah.
was Thomas Acton, and Donald Kenrick. They weren't Roma, but they were deeply involved in Romani issues. And it was through them, if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
that I was invited to attend the First World Congress, which at the last minute had to change location because of threats. The original place we were supposed to meet was threatened, and so it was moved to another place. So that was a very early example of what I had to put up with. Um, and really, because of those 3 people, um, I got pulled into it.
Yeah, I understand. Wow. But I read a couple of things, and Fernando also informed. So you said that you changed the place because it was threatened. So the new place that you changed was so sort of like a clandestine, like a hided place to be safe. Wow. So how was then the situation? Was the Romani people then in London like living in a stigmatizing reality, to understand, right?
Oh yes, there were neighborhoods, but they were people in houses. So as long as you were in a house, it didn't really matter so much.
Okay.
Um, but if you were still traveling, then you were breaking the law,
Mm,
breaking the Caravan Sites Act.
I understand.
You didn't stop on a government designated area like a reservation. Um, and it was because of the family was on the road that they were pulled over, and the incident occurred that got into the paper, and because of that,
Mm,
when I want to come back to education about our history that we don't know. And
mm,
when I have been in Eastern Europe visiting Romani schools, little children, teenagers, and I give them a kind of a brief overview of what we know about our history,
mm,
but they know about the hostility from the outside world. They know from the parents that it's always been this way. They're going to hear that. Well, we've always been persecuted. I don't want us, any of us, to see ourselves as victims. We are the victims of what has been done, but it doesn't serve a purpose to play the victim card. Feel sorry for us. Poor gypsies, be nice to us. That doesn't work. What I would tell the children was, instead of thinking about us as being victims, think about us as being survivors and warriors, because our ancestors left 1,000 years ago from our ancestral home, has never had a country, never had an army, never had an industry, an economy,
mm,
never caused a war, but especially never having had a country, and being forbidden to go places, to speak our language, to wear our clothing, to, to call ourselves Romani people. We are the Romani people. We're still here.
mm.
What a tribute to survival that is. The strength in us to survive as a people, as fragmented as we are, we're still here.
Yeah,
And
that's very strong.
we're not going anywhere. And
Mm,
we've got to tell people, I mentioned a while ago, not enough is known about our losses in the Nazi genocide. Most people don't know that we were also in the Inquisition in
mm,
Spain. I think there's only one book about that, and maybe two essays about Calais being shipped to the Americas to
mm,
get them out of Spain. The first Roma were Calais Roma in the Americas. Came from Spain with Christopher Columbus in 1498. Calo presence in America is
mm.
the first Romani presence. Nobody knows this. Most Romanis don't know this.
Mm.
This is
But
this
but
is
you
cool.
did wrote a little bit about this, and some of us had a chance to read it, and that's That's extraordinary, but I understand that the public knowledge doesn't know that because it's such a invisibilized knowledge. And I know there's so much to speak, and I was wondering because you did say about the knowledge, about the history, and besides of your own known produced work, I know and it's well known that you have collected and built an extraordinary archive and library on Romani history, culture, language, racism. And I was wondering how this journey began and what motivated you to invest and preserve such knowledge.
I mean, how did the collection start? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, yes.
Well, it started about the same time that I got involved with the Education Council in London, because then I went to our local library to find books about gypsies. Um, and there were the books by George Borrow,
Mm.
Dora Yates, and they were all romantic books, none of them written by Roma.
Yeah.
Um, but I got what I could. I took some of them home, sort of forgot to return them to the library. They're probably on the shelf back here.
Send it to us.
uh, but then um, I got more and more. The more I learned, and now we're back to education, because the more I learned about my own history,
Hmm.
um, the more curious I got, because there were so many different conflicting explanations. When did when did the Europeans discover that we came from India? Okay, when they figured that out, they had to decide, well, when did the ancestors leave India? Why did they leave? How did they get to the West? And every book you read or read had a different explanation.
Hmm.
We are now much closer to the full story. Um, so I started to go to bookshops and look for serious books,
Hmm.
but then I would also buy silly books, romance books, love of a gypsy queen, that kind of thing. I fell in love with a gypsy, um, because part of the course that I was now teaching uh, dealt with the stereotype
Yeah.
and the romantic love gypsy, the unattainable gypsy girl, all the more desirable because she was unattainable, made the topics of lots of silly novels. Um, then, when I would start going to Europe, first thing I would do is go to the bookstores
Hmm.
in different cities, especially the antiquarian bookstores.
Hmm.
And I would buy fairly cheaply because not many people were interested. So I could buy these books and put them in my suitcase and bring them back. And then other people who had their own collections would donate them to me.
Hmm.
Um, and so gradually it grew and grew and grew, and it is now huge. And I am in the process of looking for a home for it in Europe. That would involve, does involve space, somewhere to put it, because it's pretty big. and the expense of shipping it, packing it, and shipping it. And I also have some provisos that go with it. If I will bequeath this, it will probably end up at a university. But if it does, the university must have a permanent course in Romani studies, supervised by a Romani person with non-Romani involvement, but the has to be controlled by Romanis, not non-Romanis. And ideally, a degree, a doctorate in Romani studies, something like that. So that's a lot to ask for.
But
So
you deserve, and I think it's a lot of work behind, and I also think it's a good homage, but also a good way to transfer knowledge, right? Because I can see that you invested in a way, and you wanted to build an archive to not just find about and learn about Romani people, but also find anti racism, right? Because with knowledge we fight racism. And one question for you would be, how do how do we make sure that not only we preserve the archives and your archive and your library, but also we make it accessible to Romani people? Do you have any idea how we can do that?
one of the things we wanted to do when the the there was a period of time when there was a deposit of money converted from the gold stolen from Jews and Romanis in the Holocaust that the Nazis converted and put into secret accounts in Switzerland.
Mm.
The Swiss, of course, kept very quiet about that, but it was discovered. All of that money was discovered. And once that happened, there was a uproar about, well, that money belongs to Jews and Romanis, Roma, Sinti, all different in Daya. So they set up a committee. It was all Jewish. We tried to have a member, but they didn't want a member. And this committee asked anybody who thought they had a right to claim some of that money to write up a proposal and submit it. And then the council would evaluate the proposal and figure out how much you should get. Well, our proposal got nowhere. They ignored it. But that proposal, coming back to your question, that proposal was to use the money we asked for, which I think was about 20 million out of what, 450 million or something. I mean, it was a tiny amount. Was to create 6 centers, one in North America, one in South America, and then the rest in Europe, in major cities. And these centers would be social centers for local Romanis, but also educational centers. There would be computer terminals. There would be physical libraries, but there would also be digitized material online. there could be classes in history, language, and culture. And all of this was laid out in our proposal. It went nowhere.
Mm.
But since that time, computers have really emerged. The internet has emerged. And I've said before, the internet is a global medium,
Mm-hmm.
perfect for a global people. I mean, we're talking right now
Yeah.
by computer, which is fantastic. Um, so if there were a center, it wouldn't be just books on shelves in a library at a university. It would be an accessible Romani Studies Center. And that is asking for a great deal, even a separate building or a separate suite of rooms. But it's not impossible. A colleague of mine, Peter, in England, um, has created a
Mm-hmm.
Romani Center, which is a suite of rooms with a library and computers. And if he can do it, everybody can do it. They've got it in Czech Republic and in Bucharest, and, everywhere. This would just be the same thing, bigger, with more needing more space.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
I haven't approached any of the universities in Spain. You could keep your ears open. See,
Definitely, definitely. I mean, we heard about Torak, right? Peter Torak.
yes, yes.
Yes, and we know that I guess you need a much more space, and I just love this idea that this a new home of your archive will involve actually active participation of Romani people and enrichment in our knowledge and more resources also for us. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit like not just only about your personal archive, but how the knowledge about Romani people has evolved. Do you think it had improved? Do you think we are progressing? Are we making a difference now that there are a little bit more knowledge from within the community in creating scholarship?
Which community are you
Like
referring to?
our minority. I am not referring to one community, Romani scholars or Romani professionals, educated. Do you see an involvement or an improvement in creating knowledge from within?
I can tell you, I, I, I can't speak for Europe, but here, no.
Mm,
There are no rich Romani families putting up money for scholarships for Romani youngsters. The culture here is very, very conservative.
mm,
And there's still this idea that if you get educated in the non-Romani way, you lose your Romani-ness.
mm,
Um, and that brings us back to culture. Remember that the biggest Romani population in North and South America is Vlach,
mm,
which is to say Călăraș and Machvano. The Călărașa mostly left Romania through Russia and then came to the Americas. The Machwaya left Romania mostly through Serbia and crossed over. So their immediate history post abolition was different. Machwaya um, were given an education, they were taken into the army and so on. When the Călăraș going into Russia, were sort of left on their own, and then came. Um, so there's more Romani, global Romani awareness amongst the Machwaya, who
Mm.
are mostly in California. Um, and they are doing things in a useful way. And there are even some have become politicians and joined the police force and so on. But normally, the those who left slavery from the Shatras in the
Mm-hmm.
out there um, were not educated. They couldn't read and write. They were very conservative. They were very cut off from the Romanian culture, except from the Casazzi
Mm.
Romanis, the house ones. Lost the language pretty quickly because they weren't allowed to speak it around the Gaji.
Yeah.
Um, they got better food, they got better clothes, which meant that the Agor slaves in the fields
Mm.
resented those in the house, and so there was a disunity. Um, but they came to America still with their private Romani culture, much more Indian in many ways,
Mm.
which keeps the barrier between the Romani world and the non-Romani world much more firmly in place. This concept of being marime,
Yeah.
of being not just, well, marime is physically unclean, no, is spiritually unclean, not physically unclean.
Mm.
And you can become marime, and once you're marime, then your own community will deal with you differently.
Mm.
Um, People won't, and if you are too socially involved with non-Romani people and you eat their food and so on and sit on their chairs and drink their tea, you can become spiritually unclean. And once that happens, families won't let you through the door if you go and visit. Um, and if you send your children to school, you have made them sit next to non-Romani students and eat non-Romani food in the cafeteria, and so on and so on and so on. So that is still very much in place.
Mm.
The other thing that's happening is the social structure, both here in Canada, United States, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia. The Vlach populations have been held together by the Kris,
Mm-hmm.
which is like a tribunal.
Yeah.
And people, when I came here, people obeyed the findings of the Kris. They don't anymore.
But I was also wondering, Kako, because now we are approaching our very final questions. I have only two questions left. And I was wondering, how do you see the responsibility of academic institution in addressing this historical invisibilization of our Romani knowledge? What are their roles?
It depends. In academia, which is not a Romani thing, in academia, we have to be recognized for who and what we really are, what we have contributed. At the moment, the two areas that have attracted academics are the linguists. Most of the work on our language, almost
Mm.
all of it, has been done by non-Romani people who have
Mm.
profited from it, who've received lots of money to study us. Um, without giving anything back to the people that provided with the material. Some have, but mostly they haven't. And then the other interest is in our music, especially the classical, Hungarian classical tradition, and flamenco. There is a great deal of academic interest in both of those areas and in the Balkan style. Um, there is also academic interest from governments more than academia on population movement and integration and so on, but mostly the different countries would rather that we lose our identity,
Mm.
our language and culture that makes us different,
Mm.
and just adapt and become integrated into the larger population, then they wouldn't have to deal with bilingual education and this, that, and the other. This has two problems. One is that assimilation, I'm all for integration. Assimilation to me is a kind of genocide
Mm.
because you end up not being who you are.
Yeah.
So that's one bad thing. The other bad thing is many of us are obviously not white. So then you become a visible minority without a community.
Mm.
Because for conservative communities, if you don't know how to speak the language, and if you don't know how to behave in a conservative Romani community, you won't be able to fit into a Romani community. You will be accused of having been turned into a payo, a gajo, but the gaje won't see you as one of them. So you're caught in the middle.
Mm.
And we don't want that to happen. And you get a country such as Hungary where the government will allow you to have your Romani organizations, which has created several dozen Romani organizations in our typical Romani way, disagreeing with each other, which is just what the Hungarian government would like to see us
Mm.
fragmenting amongst ourselves. We have to learn, in some cases, to agree to disagree, but to work together. And something I try to remember to say every time I'm talking like this, the Jews share much of the same experience as us in their time in Europe. They also disagree with each other, but when something serious is on the horizon, if a change is going to come, somehow they put differences aside and they say, is it good for the Jews?
Mm.
In other words, what's going to come? Forget our differences, but as a people, as Jews, is it good for us as a people? That's why I've got people in there.
Yeah.
But we have to say, forget our differences. Stop arguing about who's the biggest boss and who's the more important, who's got the more titles. Is it good for all of us as Romani people?
Yeah.
And that's the direction we have to take.
Yeah, I think it's the best way to conclude this conversation, because I had one of my last question was like, what is the message you want to leave us with. And I think this is it, right? To look at our common struggle, not at the difference, and to look at our common goals, our shared history and struggle and pain and violence, but also resistance. I really like how during the interview you try to express and highlight the resistance that the Romani people have faced. You also try to engage how your work have been combating this stereotypical prejudicial, including on the gender dynamic, because for people watching outside, Professor Hancock also talked about the stereotypes on female and Romani women, the sexualization, orientalization. And I think it's very important to make that definition, right? Because there is a clear gendered violence addressed to Romani people, and the prejudice works in that way. So, Professor Hancock, for us was such a great pleasure to listen to you. And I just have one very last short question, because I really want to finish this conversation on a positive and forceful but also proud way. And I was thinking, what achievement make you most proud of in all your career and academic journey?
My personal
Yes,
achievement,
yes, personal achievement. Yeah,
reaching the age of 83.
that's great. Wow, that's great, because reaching that, it's also a gift for us, because we can be here with you and learn from you, and have also different perspectives, because I might have different approaches towards certain topics, but I do learn, and I have learned a lot in my developing as a scholar from your work, from your activism, and I think you have been an inspiration for many scholars in not just in Europe but also in the world. And we are all grateful for having your books, your essays, your conferences, and also your prizes, because from very early 90s, or I'm not sure if I say the name, but you were a human rights defender. Sweden had gave you a prize for that, and you have been present in this political project of Romani emancipation, such as participating in 71 Romani Congress, and I think that's great that we can have generations in one place speaking, even though on internet, and agreeing on certain things, but also being able to develop together and challenge together. And
Let me say it was from Norway, not Sweden.
oh, Norway. I'm sorry. Yes, I stayed with the Sweden because I'm not sure why, but it was one of the Scandinavian countries. So I'm very pleased to hear that. Professor Hancock, we have finished now. I will like to thank you once again. It was such a pleasure for us. This interview, as I mentioned, is made by Chanipen, Research Memory and Justice, which is an organization aimed to promote conocimiento, knowledge, which is so important for us, as you spoke, not just in your book, but also in this interview. Knowledge is one of our powerful tools to fight anti-Roma racism, to recover memory, to recover our history, but also to find pride in who we are. And I hope we will have this interview seen and listened by many people. And why not, hopefully, soon to have you in Spain. Now that your book, We Are the Romani People, will be translated in Spain, and it will be available for everyone in the Altramus, which is led by one of our very important and creative illustrated, Sandra Carmona. And I really hope that we will also have your Spanish version with us. So thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Parikarao. Muchísimas gracias. Muito mes. Thank you so much.
Sasti Kako. happy to let you know, dear people, that today we had Professor Hancock with us. He is one of the most important figure in the Romani studies, both academic and activist activities. And we were extremely proud to have here today to discuss one of important piece of knowledge. We Are the Romani People book after 2 decades. And I really hope and encourage all of you back home to read his book and to have it in your own libraries. So here was with you, Maria from Chanipen, Research, Memory and Justice. I would like to remember to you that every month we have a book launch or a book presentation where we try to share knowledge from our own perspectives, from our own approaches, critical about resistance, about anti-Roma racism, history, memory, and all the time trying to broaden the Romani knowledge. So thank you so much for being with us.